Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second session of our class on the Barmen Declaration. I want to introduce Steve Bouma-Prediger as no stranger to this podium. He was here in 2015 to talk to us about Laudate Si, the Pope Francis's declaration about the care for our common home. Came back the next year, 2016, and gave us about 4 sessions on a new book called A New Heaven and a New Earth, Reclaiming Biblical Eschatology. Then he came back in 2017, and he talked about his book, Beyond Homelessness, Christian Faith in a Culture of Displacement. In 2021, he did a class on earthkeeping and character, exploring a Christian ecological virtue ethic. And today he's here to teach us more about the Barmen Declaration, particularly its implications for countries, not just the U.S., in today's society. And his background, he graduated from Hope in 1979. He's been teaching at Hope for over 30 years, since 1994. He went to, after graduating from Hope, he got an MDiv from Fuller Seminary, a PhD in Religious Studies from the University of Chicago. Please welcome Steve Bouma-Prediger for his second session.
Can't live with it.
There we go.
All right. It turned itself off. All right. There we go. Everyone hear me okay? Especially in the back? Okay, good. Well, it's great to be back with you. I hadn't realized until you just mentioned all those, how many times I've taught a Sunday school class at Hope Church. That's great because you're a great crowd, great questions, and this is the second and last session of this very brief discussion of the Barmen Declaration. I've got some handouts and probably not enough to go around, so I'll share with a neighbor. This is just a brief summary.
Is it different than this?
Yes.
Oh.
It's not the Barmen Declaration. It's simply a summary of what we talked about last class, especially for folks maybe who weren't here last time. Recall this two-part course, what was the Barmen Declaration, why is it important? That was the question last week. And the question for today is, what can we learn from the Barmen Declaration as we face the challenges of today? But I want to go over again a little bit of what the Barmen Declaration, Barmen Theological Declaration, the full title, is before we turn our attention to what can we learn from the Barmen Declaration today. So yeah, you probably have 2 handouts. One is the Barmen Declaration itself, and then a single page on simply a summary of what it is and what the 6 theses or main points of the Barmen Declaration is. So again, just some review of background. The Barmen Declaration was drafted and approved in Wuppertal, Barmen, Germany, hence the name, Barmen Declaration, based upon the place where this document was written in May of 1934 by the Confessing Church, 2 capital C's. That is to say, those Christians in Germany who opposed the German Christian movement and pledged allegiance to Hitler and embraced the racist and anti-Semitic principles of Nazism. So the Confessing Church was a movement of Germans from all different denominations, Lutheran, Reformed, you name it, who said nein, i.e., nope, we're not clicking our heels, putting our hands on our hearts and pledging allegiance to Adolf Hitler. 2 important authors, among others, were folks you might know. Karl Barth, recognized by many as the premier Protestant theologian of the latter half of the 20th century, died in 1968, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was hung by special order of Adolf Hitler in 1945. The Barmen Declaration's 6 theses are listed here. First, the only source of revelation is the Word of God, Jesus Christ, the Word incarnate. Any other possible sources, for example, earthly powers, will not be accepted. Second, Jesus Christ is the only Lord of all aspects of life. There should be no other authority. So much for the dualisms that perpetuate our lives, right, between sacred and secular, religious and non-religious, Sunday and the rest of the week. Sounds like Abraham Kuyper from the Dutch Reformed tradition.
If I may interrupt, please raise your hand if you have that, if you need a single sheet for today. Raise your hand.
So Jesus Christ is the Lord of political life, as well as quote-unquote religious life or devotional life. And there should be no other authority. Third point here, the thesis, the message and order of the church should not be influenced by the current political convictions. Fourth, leadership in the church is not dominion, but a form of service to the ministry entrusted to all its members. Thus, there can be no special leader, Führer in German, apart from that ministry. Fifth thesis of the Barmen Declaration, the state should not fulfill the task of the church, nor should the church fulfill the task of the state. Each has their own important task to do. The most important task for the state is to achieve what, again, Dutch Reformed folks would say is public justice. Justice for all, regardless of religious convictions or lack thereof. State and church are both limited to their own business and should not start to take over the other. Sixth and finally here, the Barmen Declaration rejects both the subordination of the church to the state and the subordination of the Word and Spirit to the church. So that's a brief summary of the 6 theses of the Barmen Declaration. And it looks like I grossly underestimated the number of copies I would need, but Judy, as always, is making up for that, so we've got enough to go around. All right. Question for today, I'd like for you to talk about in a small group, and you get to choose your group, 2 or 3 people. Proximity is probably the best way to do that, so you don't have to run around. But let me just give you those questions. Are there any places in the world today where the church is facing a similar situation to that of the church in Germany in the mid-1900s? Yeah, next question. Yeah, Jane, you got that right. Are there any, well, if so, then what can they learn and what can we learn from the Barmen Declaration? So, are there any places, yes or no? Identify maybe what those places were in the world today where the church is facing a similar situation to that of the church in Germany in the mid-1900s, 1930s and 40s. And if so, what can they learn and what can we learn from the Barmen Declaration? Preguntas on the preguntas? Any questions on the questions? All right. Judy, thank you very much.
Raise your hand if you still need one.
Muchas gracias. All right, you've got 10 minutes or so. Find your friends in a small group and talk about those 2 questions. Go to it.
Did you get James Schuyler's noting that, reminding you that there's a lot of people online, and they're left out when there's not a whole group discussion.
Yeah.
So you might want to minimize the...
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can keep it short.
Okay.
We can go to 5 minutes. We look at each other, but not...
Yeah. Okay. Lord, you do the word of God, and I have your name recently written. Challenge. You're having way too much fun over here.
No,
Cut
we
it out. Cut it out.
Do you know a guy named John Fugelseth, a comedian?
Yeah.
Oh, you do?
I know of him, yeah.
Yeah, he just wrote a book, and we're just talking about the fact that he says, go to Jesus, not Paul. Paul was years later writing about Jesus. Go to Jesus.
The heck with Titus. Go to Jesus. Okay, let's continue the conversation, but all together. Good luck herding the cats here. Let's continue, but all together, please. Someone start us off. Share what you talked about in your small group. Are there places in the world today where the church is facing a similar situation to that of the church in Germany in the mid-1900s? When I asked that question a minute ago, a number of you responded, and we got mics so everyone can hear, mobile mics.
Remember that we are being live streamed and recorded, and wait till the mic comes to you before you start speaking so everyone can hear.
Anyone, dive in, brave soul, start us off.
I think Barry should start us off.
Some would say, Jane, the punishment of that is that you ought to start us off. Over here? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, that's different.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, we really agreed on where's the church in all of this. Why aren't we speaking up more? And I'm not just saying Hope Church, and the church who believes in love your neighbor as yourself. Easy statement, hard to do, but it is a statement that universally should be accepted. And we're just not seeing enough of hearing from somebody else other than both divided sides. And I think who could be the next spokesman, and we need to speak up more.
Thank you. Someone else? Share with us what you talked about in your small group.
Well, we started with some questions for you, Steve. The first one is we're trying to understand what this looked like. Like, how big was the population of the churches who were resistant versus those who went along? And then the second question is, how did they get organized? If you could help us understand that, I think it would give us some ideas about whether those are models for us to follow. And really, I think a third question is, how big do you think the resistance is in churches today versus the churches that are the white Christian nationalists?
Good question. Someone in the room has an answer to that.
There were 65 million Germans in 1933.
There we go.
38% were Roman Catholics, so didn't participate in this whole nonsense, Protestant nonsense. Less than 1% were Jews, about 0.8%. There were also various different pietist sects and such that did not participate in the national church. The German Christians was a movement in the national church, not an organized group. That's the pro-Nazis.
Yeah.
The confessing church was a movement in the national church. It was not an organized religion. And then so somebody called a convention, and a bunch of people went to it, and they came up with this document. The of the 25 Landeskirchen, or local synods of the churches, how they were organized, there were 28. 25 were of split opinions. Only the ones in Prussia had only one opinion, and that's all that's allowed in Prussia.
Right.
There were various clergy who came, and if someplace I saw a figure, there were 6,000 Protestant clergy at the time. It seems too low. There were about 3,000 on one side and 3,000 on the other side, and they could not agree among themselves. So we have a statement written by two guys and apparently endorsed by a majority vote of those who were present at the convention. Is that fair, sir?
That's quite fair.
Thank you.
In other words, a relatively small group of people. That's the short answer. It wasn't like, there was a majority of folks who were behind this, the writing of it, endorsed it. So, very diverse place, even just among the Protestants. But there are a lot of different kinds of Protestants, so-called evangelical church.
Hi, Emily Christensen. I was at a conference this weekend in Glen Ellen, Illinois, organized by churches in the Middle East. So it was in solidarity with Palestinians and Palestinian churches. And so I heard from many witnesses to the atrocities that are ongoing, and a declaration, a statement of faith was written at the end and signed. There were over 800 participants there, and they had taken a poll, and 45% of them were evangelicals, which I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Another 20% were post-evangelicals, and then kind of went down from there. But that gave me hope, I guess I would say, that there are churches that are supporting Palestinians against what they are experiencing as empire and as oppression and colonization and all the things to a great extent. So anyway, I just offer that as a hopefulness that there are ecumenical movements like this happening.
Thank you for sharing that. And no surprise, someone in this crowd who's got a recent experience at an event similar to what was going on in Germany, right? Many people would say that the Middle East is a primary example of something similar. So, yeah. Dave?
Two questions. One, what was the effect of the Barmen Declaration in Germany after it was produced? And second, and maybe this is for discussion, how can a church, and I'm thinking a local church like us as a faith community, be prophetic without being partisan?
Great question. How much time do we have on that one? Maybe a whole nother class, 2 or 3 sessions. Prophetic without being partisan. Is that possible?
Yes.
Yeah? Have an Amos or Jeremiah or a Micah? I love the word Micah. Who is like Yahweh in Hebrew? It's a rhetorical question. Yeah, some would say, okay, how can we be prophetic without being partisan, i.e., Democrat, Republican, etc.? Any thoughts on that? Let's take a little time with that question. Yeah?
Well, we got the mic here first.
Oh, okay.
Second, and then third, okay?
All right.
Hold that thought.
I might derail this conversation by the thought that I was focused on. Shall I just hold it or throw it out there?
Up to you. If you're more likely, like me, to forget it, let's do it now.
Okay. As I look through the synopsis of the Declaration, number 6 seems to me to be the Reformation in a nutshell. And I don't know if we have time to straighten out our theology. Because it strikes me that the subordination of word and spirit to the church is our current heresy as a nation with civil religion. And I don't know if we have time to straighten out our theology before responding to the current situation, it does not seem to me that there is a snowball's chance that we can get that straightened out, and those of us who will insist that the work of the Spirit and the Word of God is not subordinated to a church entranced with itself and its money.
There's a whole nother class. Take note, folks. All right. Spirit, and you're on the term spirit. I just took my students outside in my Christian spirituality course at Hope last week because a number of you know this already. Ruach and pneuma, the Hebrew words for spirit, translated spirit, also are the words for wind. So we did a little phenomenology of the wind. What's the wind? How do you know it exists? And most importantly, can you control it? No. The Holy Spirit can't be controlled, just like the wind. We can maybe catch it from time to time, those wind turbines that now provide some electricity, but it's uncontrollable. So, and yet our penchant is to want to control the Spirit. So that's maybe a topic for a whole other time again, but that's our human tendency, so it seems, is to want to control the Holy Spirit, control God. In this case, Christian nationalism is a classic bad example of attempts by we Christians to use God in favor of politics. A bunch of other hands. I'm not sure who's got the mic next. Bob?
So the Justice and Reconciliation Ministry has struggled with the question of how do we act not in a partisan fashion, but respond to events that are happening. And I think the answer is in the second half of that. We respond as a church to behaviors, laws, actions that violate our understanding of what Jesus asks us to do relative to our neighbors, for example. And so if one political party is engaged in those activities because they are in power across the branches, then it will appear to be partisan. In fact, what we are critiquing is their behavior, their beliefs that produce that behavior, and their actions.
Regardless of party.
Regardless of party.
So
if
you would
the
argue
other
it's-
party were engaged in that, and if the other party, well, for example, there was an assassination just this week of someone from the other side, regretfully, and we should be critical of that. We should say that does not follow our faith belief, even though I can't think of one thing I would agree with that individual who met that fate.
Next question or comment. Yeah.
Just to add to what Bob was saying, so if you look at your bulletins, every week there are justice and reconciliation recommendations that we believe are political and not partisan. So there are things like famine in Palestine, standing up for democracy, things like that. So, and I think there's going to be an adult ed class on this coming up in October. So we can pursue that question
Preview
later.
of coming attractions. Yep. Who's next? Got Jane up here, someone over here.
So first of all, I got to say what Barry said, since he didn't raise his hand.
In other words, be careful if you're in a small group with Jane. She's going to tell on you.
Tell you. But Barry made a very good point that there were some contradictions in the Barmen statement itself. And so just sort of looking at those contradictions about, it suggests that give to the state what's the state, but on the other hand, where is authority in that? And so there's still contested who has the authority in assigning the tasks and in what tasks you choose to do. I hope I summarized that okay. Yesterday, I listened to Borowitz do an interview with a man named John Fugelsang. And so I just looked up the book. He's a humorist, but a man who really, really knows Christian faith. And the title of his book is The Separation of Church and Hate. And the subtitle is A Sane Person's Guide to Taking Back the Bible from Fundamentalist, Fascist, and Flock Fleecing Frauds. So
he's working hard on his alliteration there.
yes, yeah.
Whoa.
And I'm struggling it with myself. But I recommend you look this guy up and see what he says. In essence, he says we should be following Jesus and not making an idol of the Bible, that we should be following Jesus. And he talks about people who sort of hate the Jews, and then they go to Leviticus to tell the world what it should and shouldn't be doing. They go to Hebrew scripture. But anyway, he's very funny, but he's really knowledgeable, and I recommend him.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, questions? Got a couple more back here.
While the microphones are running, I'll do one really quick. Howard Hageman was one of my teachers at New Brunswick Seminary, and he pointed out that the Kaiser of Germany during the First World War was a good Lutheran, and he could go to prayers in the morning and in the afternoon wipe 3 nations off the map because he had this separation thing that Reformed people don't have. Thank you.
One thought that came to me when we were talking is, at what point did the church really solidify? I mean, you could go back and, maybe say it was in the 70s, of this idea the church felt like it needed to harness political power in order to accomplish its desires for the world, even though that meant making other people do things externally. Let's say, abortion was the main example there. They felt like it was worth it to go for the political power to control that one issue, and then that slippery slope of you get a little political power, and you're like, oh, look what we can do, and then it just starts going from there, and then doors start opening, like, oh, we can do this, and then we can do that, and then, but it came from that initial thing. At least my reading of recent history would be that one issue was enough for them to go after, and then that's now led us to where we are now. But again, that churches, what was it, that mental tipping point where it was worth it to go after that political power so aggressively?
It's a great question. It reminds me of an aphorism you're probably aware of. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The more power we get, the more likely it is we're going to be overcome by that power, and we'll abuse it. And the other question, we may come back to this, but again, when did we go wrong? My Mennonite friends would say in the 16th century. Heck with the 1970s. Right? When the so-called Anabaptist movement, Church of the Brethren, the Mennonites, Quakers, all of whom said, yes, we're Christians too, but we refuse to ever use violence. Of course, the Lutherans Reformed. Other denominations said, no, there are certain circumstances in which it is morally permissible for Christians to use violence. And our peacemaking friends said, nope. So that's another issue here that divides us. Is it ever morally permissible for Christians to use violence? I don't know. Who's next?
I was, John Schmidt. I was anxious to come to this class to hear about Barmen because, quite frankly, I hadn't heard about Barmen a whole lot in even my Reformed theological persuasion.
Yeah.
I came to learn about Barmen very recently.
You just read my mind. I was going to say, when did you hear about Barmen?
I heard about Barmen in being in Ottawa County with churches that used as a justification to not wear masks during COVID and to felt it was up to themselves or to their church body to decide who should be vaccinated or not. There are parts of the Christian community here in Ottawa County that, not officially, but in conversations with clergy and elders, refer to Barmen as a justification for opposing state kind of notions. If it's the church that gets to decide, then those agencies that churches support, like private schools, Libertas, as an example, and this, justifies not following the lead of or the influence of a state, a government kind of thing. And there are, for example, persons in leadership in Ottawa County, whatever, Impact, whatever, that would refer to Barmen as a justification for doing what they do. I wonder about the effect of oppositional thinking. Somebody does something and we're so politically divided that another group then decides to do the opposite or advocate the opposite. I'm not sure that Barmen is a good thing. Maybe it's exactly the thing, but it's not going to settle anything because it's just going to make people stronger in their oppositional beliefs. So I'm wondering about that.
Yeah. You're not alone, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, John too. Circling back to your original question, BP.
Which was what?
Where do you see this happening?
Yeah.
And I would just like to remind us, especially as we think about our Christian voice, there's so many places in Europe that are struggling with this. If you think about the Italian vote recently, Phil is going to talk to you right now about Hungary and the Reformed Church. Poland. So I think that as we think about the global body of Christ, I think we need to remember we don't have to figure this out on our own, but I hope that we have a mutual exchange in terms of our Christian witness in the world as we grapple with some of these topics.
Point well taken. Thank you for mentioning that.
So,
Phil, word is it, rumor has it, you got something to say.
Yeah, that's what I just heard. So one of the initial thoughts I had was about Hungary, and how the church is unfortunately tied up in the politics there. So their strongman, Orban, who has self-proclaimed himself fashioning an illiberal democracy, one cloaked in Christianity and Christian nationalism there, the forefront of stopping the Islamic hordes from once again invading Europe and in the form of gypsies or others, and as I'm hearing out of this year, like the refugees and the waves of refugees. I mean, he's called himself a Christian and done absolutely the opposite, but he's been protected also by the Reformed Church in Hungary and its former president, who was his close spiritual advisor and rose up in the ranks as both the head of the church and investing himself in politics until a scandal broke, and which I don't have all the details, but it was child abuse and a lot of ugly stuff, which has just shattered the church. But when the president of the Hungarian church was forced to step down, he first tried to hold on to power. Instead of being exiled, he was just demoted back to running the church in Budapest and praised for the work he had done, and that continued to be divisive in the church. This all happened in the last 2-3 years. So it's an ongoing crisis for them. His hand-picked successor became the president, but it's just really wrecked the church, and there's created movements against these more authoritarian forces within the same church, and the battle continues there for them. And it's not a hopeful example at all, outside of the few faithful standing up and saying, this is not us, and it shouldn't be us.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Judy?
This past week, I did some reading about
That's a good thing.
what led to the writing of the Barmen Confession.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really stood out to me was that the church in 1933, the statement from them that precipitated the Barmen, they held together, one over the other, the cross and the swastika, as if they were one and the same. And that was what the church, where this church stood. So my thinking and my comment has to do, ultimately, what is the relationship between church and state? I would say it's not the same. It's not one. But at the same time, when we place them as separate entities, which has the most power over, or is there a way to truly separate those powers?
It's a great question. It reminds me of a book that deals with this issue in a larger sense. What's the relationship, or should be the relationship, between Christians and culture more broadly? H. Richard Niebuhr's book, Christ and Culture, is a classic book, still in print, used in classes and seminaries, colleges. And there are 5 different approaches in that book, the last one of which he calls the Reformed approach, Christ transforming culture. Not Christ over against culture, that's those crazy Anabaptists. Christ of culture are the bloody liberals, etc. But there's this typology that he puts forward, and he basically says Reformed folk, if they take their tradition seriously, ought to be about transforming culture and the powers that go with it along the lines of, well, love and justice. Let's start there. So thank you for that comment. Yeah,
Just a quick comment about...
One over there first, Steve first.
Okay. You keep track of the order for me here.
I'd like to go back to John Schmidt's comment for just a minute.
Okay.
It does seem legitimate, and this is sort of a church-state issue itself,
Yeah.
for the church to stand over against the government in the way that John's examples, right?
Yeah.
But that leaves a huge question unanswered. The question would be, when the church is taking a stance, are they taking a stance that really reflects what it would mean to follow Jesus? So, for example, on masks and vaccines, you could ask what Christian value would support the idea of wearing masks as a public health measure?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an argument below the surface of whether the church should speak against the government. The argument is, what should the church be saying?
Okay, thank you.
So,
Thank you. Who's
I
next?
just
Dave.
want to follow up on Judy's comment about
Okay.
the cross and the swastika being sort of jointly embraced.
Yeah.
In our own life here at Hope Church, we do not have the flag as a symbol of worship at the front of church.
You're going to apply this to Hope Church?
Yes.
Oh, mercy.
I'm saying we have made a separation.
Yeah.
By not bringing the symbol of the state and the symbol of the cross and the faith together as among our symbols of worship. And I think
That's one of the first things I look for when I visit another church. If I'm guest preaching or teaching a class, go to the sanctuary, and I look for the U.S. flag. And some churches have one, some don't. I'm happy about the churches that don't. Presumably that means they're perhaps not confusing the two, but that's a great question. So, yeah.
I want to reflect here on something I've been thinking about for some time. It's become a cliche to say that America is so divided that there is no middle ground anymore. And using 9/11 and our response to 9/11 to embrace each other in love as Americans, appreciative of our shared values. I want to suggest that we are not as divided. I want to suggest that we're being manipulated by that concept. If we are divided, then CNN speaks to the left and Fox speaks to the right, and we dig into our little clique, our little thought process. We're with all the good reformers, as it were. They're all the evil evangelicals. And I think that's a mistake. I think that plays into the hands of journalists who have a simple, sort of framework in which to write. Here, I'm going to write within this framework. We're so divided, right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that maybe the way to break this is to start saying to people, no, we are a united people. We have a shared set of values about our families, about what democracy is, and we need to start emphasizing that, as opposed to allowing politicians who, again, they're about selecting their voters and dividing us into groups. And I think that for me is maybe a place where we stand and we say, no. We're not as divided as you would have us believe, because that feeds your narrative. There's a different narrative here that we need to focus on.
Thanks, Bob. Who's up next? Got one in the back.
Hi.
Need my binoculars to see you.
I'm late to the party here, so I don't know if this has been mentioned already, but kind of going off of what Bob was just saying, I am reading a little devotional right now that I'm finding extremely helpful. And it's by Hannah Reichel, who is a systematic theologian at Princeton.
Princeton, yeah.
And she did her doctoral work on the Barmen and on Karl Barth and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. But the book is called, let me think of a name. Give me a second. I'm almost 60. Oh, yeah. For Such a Time as This, an emergency devotional.
Yeah.
And she's going to be, there's like a book group that Kristen Dumais is having online this Wednesday at 8 o'clock. You can sign up for. She's going to be interviewing Hannah. She also has an Instagram presence, if that's your thing. But it's little pieces of what I need is someone who can speak to the political, the theological, the human being living in this world right now as a person of faith, like just the practical, what do I do today? How do I show up? How do I think about the small, unimportant, everyday things that I'm doing in my life right now that are continuing to serve my faith, even with everything that's going on? And it's really just working so much for me. So I'm just sharing that in case it's helpful for other people. But it's a fabulous book. And it's tiny. It's a little tiny thing.
The seemingly unimportant, I would add, yeah, everyday events. Thank you, Ann. Who's next? Comment, question?
Steve. First of all, I want to thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
It
needs to dunk.
It's essential to have this type of dialogue. And I guess it's easier to look back now on the almost 100 years ago, and Nazi Germany under Hitler was an abomination.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, therefore, Karl Barth, Martin Niemöller, and others deserve a lot of accolades. There were a lot of other churches and denominations who are more powerful. I'm thinking of, Pius XII. Of course, he was living in the Vatican right next to Mussolini, who was a cohort of Hitler.
Yeah.
But I think the key is to build a consensus and tolerance, not accepting everything. to move forward. And I think a lot of people have touched on here today that right think, whether it be fundamentalism or certain obscure text in the Bible, is not always appropriate. And I'm wondering if one of the things we ought to be taking a look at in light of our own denomination is how do we come together? And I think conversations like this are based upon education and reason, as well as the symbol of and the person of Christ, are very appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
I'm coming from over here, Steve. I think I feel the need to say something that maybe hasn't been said before, because I don't think we normally think about it. When we start struggling with the issue of the relationship between church and state, I think what, from my perspective, needs to be identified is the fact that both of them are human creations. In some respects,
even the church?
In some respects, they are both artificial. Going back thousands of years, there were no such things as states. There were tribes and there were families. Right. Going back a little less than 2,000 years ago, there were house churches. And when we now have a dynamic of felt tension between state and church, and assume that there is a corrective solution out there about how we relate, especially those of us within the institutional church, we have to identify anthropologically that we're already in a mixed up and almost twisted circumstance. I don't say that by way of offering a solution, but I think it is important for us to identify that there is a reason for the complexity that we're struggling with ethically and spiritually. And that's all I'm going to say.
Reminds me, when my wife and I lived in Toronto, we were members of the St. Matthew's in the Basement, a non-denominational church, mostly hippies, Christian hippies from the 60s and 70s. And we met in the basement of a local church. Didn't own a building. And yeah, not all was good there too, but it was a fascinating experience. People trying to take their faith seriously in all that they did. Other questions? Yeah.
I'll just make a quick comment. I haven't read it yet, but the New York Times is just starting a new letter called Believing.
Correct.
So it'd be interesting to see.
I read the Times every day. New York Times.
Where that goes, right? It's a new newsletter, so it'll maybe take a life of its own, but it's very open-ended. Newsletter, so.
Yeah, the language, religion, spirituality, I'm not sure those editors have it all figured out yet. They don't really know what they're talking about, but they'll hopefully learn more about, well, the complexity of the church, what that means. Yeah, here.
In a previous century, I was on a 10th grade debate team.
You're not that old, come on now.
And we were taught that the team which can control the definitions and terminology will win the debate.
Whoever defines the terms wins the argument. That's the old motto there.
Yeah, and I am struck by the rapidity with which our conservative friends created a narrative around the assassination of Charlie Kirk. They are making an attempt to set the definitions and the terminology in which we'll engage in public debate. And I'm thinking that the degree to which we then step onto that turf and try to work in those definitions and terminologies is the definition of defeat. They're attempting to own the truth. And I don't believe that anybody can own the truth, including us. But we were called to live the truth. And so I want to say we need to double down on what we were called to do as the response, which is to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and set the prisoner free.
Thank you. When I taught logic course long ago, and the opening line of the syllabus was, whoever defines the terms will win the argument. And there's unfortunately a lot of truth to that. So, thank you.
I want to borrow the words of someone who's no longer with us, and one of his heroes was Mr. Rogers. When there are things that are happening that are bad, wrong, look for the helpers. And to echo someone on the other side of the room, I would say try to be the helpers. Look for where the victims are, help the victims, and I think you'll find sympathy in that among a lot of different other people. And I think it's one way that we can unify ourselves is to begin to be thinking of ourselves as helping the victims. It's time to end this, and I want to thank Steve for leading us in an excellent discussion. Are there closing words that you want to say?
Yep. Yes, there are. I'm going to read a poem from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. It's in his Letters and Papers from Prison. It's entitled, Who Am I? Who am I? They often tell me I would step from my cell's confinement calmly, cheerfully, firmly, like a squire from his country house. Who am I? They often tell me I would talk to my warders freely and friendly and clearly, as though it were mine to command. Who am I? They also tell me I would bear the days of misfortune equably, smilingly, proudly, like one accustomed to win. Am I then really all that which other men tell of? Or am I only what I know of myself? Restless and longing and sick, like a bird in a cage. He's writing this from prison. Struggling for breath, as though hands were compressing my throat. Yearning for colors, for flowers, for the voices of birds. Thirsting for words of kindness, for neighborliness. Trembling with anger at despotisms and petty humiliation. Tossing in expectation of great events. Powerlessly trembling for friends at an infinite distance. Weary and empty at praying, at thinking, at making. Faint and ready to say farewell to it all. Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once? A hypocrite before others, and before myself a contemptibly woebegone weakling? Or is something within me still like a beaten army, fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Next week we will have Milt Newsma speak, and his topic will be echoing the title of a recently popular book, Jesus and Thomas Jefferson. So come back next week and hear that. Be a participant in it.